Behold, once again, I am here on the interwebs. That was a weird way to begin. How's it going, my wonderful, faithful friends? It is I, Rob, from that channel, Performance Check, and I'm here to have a bit of a conversation with you guys once again. This time about lore and mythology. Is it mega fun or super dull? I can't remember how I described it in the description now, but you get what I mean. Now, whilst I wait for, a few people to show up, I am going to do a wee bit of a channel update, because I am now posting these onto my YouTube channel. I think it's a good way of killing two birds with one stone. So, first of all, I am going to update all of you on the status of my one-shot. As I'd mentioned in a previous live stream, I have been planning a one-shot based around the Court of Whispers, the shadowy organisation that are masters of stealth and espionage. I put up an interest post on the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group, as well as the One Shot group and the RPG Brigade, and I've had quite a lot of really good interest, and I'm really excited. So tonight I am actually going to be choosing my players. I basically wanted to put the interest post up so people could see it and it could be there for a little while, and I've also been really busy as well. So I'll be choosing my players tonight. So I'll hopefully announce who will be playing either tonight or tomorrow. So that's exciting. I can see Scott Eustace has joined me. Hello, Scott. How is it going, my old pal? Yeah, so that's one thing. I will be announcing that shortly. So I'm really excited about that. And once I have my players, then I'll be able to organise when it's going to be. I didn't particularly want to put like a time on when it was going to be on the interest post because, things change. So Scott says, I believe I put into that. If not, then I'm totally interested. Cool, man. Well, I literally have no idea who I'm going to pick. So I'm just going to look into the interest post and go from there. I see Steppy Kyle has joined as well. Hello. Hi, Rob. So that is one thing. The other thing I wanted to mention, which kind of ties into the topic of the live stream today, is I'm going to be doing a little bit of a competition. Now, I've never done a competition on my YouTube channel before, so it could be a complete and utter shambles. In fact, it is likely that it will be a complete and utter shambles, but I wanted to give it a go, because one thing that I've learned from doing these live streams and having these live conversations with you guys in the community, I've learned, or rather, I already knew this, but the fact has been solidified for me that, there is so much creativity and amazing ideas floating around in this community. So why not have a competition to demonstrate that? That is something I'll be talking about later. But if it's something that you're interested in, stick around, because I think if you like lore and mythology, you might really dig it. And it is going to tie in intrinsically into the campaign that I run, the Lorekeepers, that can be found on my channel. So, without further ado, lore and mythology. Why do we use lore and mythology in role-playing games? Well, first of all, it's kind of simple. It helps build your world. It helps give your world a sense of feeling lived in. It makes your players understand that, they aren't alone. They aren't the only ones that are out there seeking adventure, because people have done it before them. And wars that they're not involved in have been fought in and won and lost long before they were even born, perhaps. And all of this just builds up sort of this tapestry on which your players in your game sort of are a part of. That's kind of the rough idea of why we have lore and mythology. But what I want to explore today is how much is too much? You know, when does it start becoming a history lesson? When does it become boring? You know, when does it become a chore to have to churn out this knowledge to your players when really they're focusing on the matter at hand? They're focusing on their campaign mission or their session mission, you know, or perhaps just their own characters' personal interests. So that's my first question to you lovely people who have joined me today. When does it become too much? I can see Lloyd has joined. Lloyd, how's it going, man? So yeah, that's my one question, and that's something that I want to explore throughout. I also would like to know when lore is a good thing, you know, when, other than obviously making it feel lived in, what I just went over, you know, what are the benefits for it being there? Now, the first thing that I can think of, other than giving it that, you know, lived in kind of feel, is that a lot of lore in your role-playing games can be unfinished. And unfinished lore is probably one of the easiest and most effective plot hooks to include in a campaign or a session of D&D, for example. It brings to life new quests, you know, that seek to be completed. To think of a classic one, the Rod of Seven Parts is probably one of the most famous magical items in Dungeons and Dragons lore. There's a great storied history as to why that staff exists. Off the top of my head, I believe it was a magical item devoted or created to uphold law in a battle against demons, and in destroying a particularly chaotic demon, the rod was shattered into 7 parts, infused now with a slight chaotic edge from that demon. Now, obviously, that's unfinished lore. That is now a story hook, because not only you know, is it a campaign mission, as it were, to collect those 7 parts, but there's also story in there. There's unfinished work to be done. There is the trace of an ancient evil upon that magical item that, you know, will feed into later stories. So that's one way that lore can be used effectively, I think. It is about understanding how much to give and how much to actually include into the main story. That is lore that is affecting what's going on in the present. It is information that isn't frivolous because it is serving the purpose, your purpose as a storyteller. Which I think is clue number one. I think is the you know, the best way to go about it at first. Scott Eustace. Got a bad connection, Rob. I'll watch this later. Sorry. No worries, man. Absolutely fine. It is a pain when that happens with this. I get, you know, questionable connection on these as well. So yeah, but what about lore that, you know, exists in your world that isn't necessarily a story arc? Something that you just want in there to, you know, build that tapestry up. See, I've got a comment from Lloyd. Let's have a look. Hello, my thoughts on when it becomes too much almost immediately. When you have characters, just drop history on characters. Sorry, wait a second. When you have characters, just drop history on characters. The best way to reveal this stuff is through traditions, beliefs, and attitudes. Once again, I do not know why this is, and I mention this every stream now, but after a while, if you type too much, I can't see what what you've said. And it isn't hit see more. I've already hit see more, and it's so I got up to traditions, beliefs, and attitudes, Lloyd. So I do apologise, but I completely agree with you, and that is one way that I like to inject lore into a session of D&D. I'll give you an example. So this doesn't really spoiler stuff, but as it's an example that I know a few people will have seen in the community, it's one that I will use. But in a recent game of the Lorekeepers, a campaign I run on my channel, the players found themselves walking into a room, a hexagonal room, to speak with the Prince of Farwide. And they were going in because they were basically going to be standing as a an impromptu audience for treaty discussions between this prince and an emissary. And as they go into this room, I described to them that they take note in particular of 6 shields on each wall of this hexagonal, room. And I just say to them, as they go into the room, you notice these shields upon each wall, and they all have a strange insignia upon them. And I leave it as that. And then have the prince turn around to them and say, well, it is fitting that we're here to talk about a defensive alliance in this room, for this is the Hall of Shields. This is where a pact was made with the Lord of the Giants. And as a symbolic gesture, they put their shields on the walls to signify that there was a defensive alliance being made. So not only have I told them the reason, why it's called the Hall of Shields, because obviously there's shields on the walls, but there is a symbolic meaning for that, and there's a little bit of lore that once that there was this pact made between the Lords of the Giants and the citizens of Farwide. Throwaway line, just dropped it in there. But just that little bit of information just gives you, a reason why they're in that room, what it's been used for before, and a little bit of the history and culture of this place. You now know that there was once a pact that went down. Let's see, I've got a few more comments. Steffi says, my connection is bad when I am watching, not live. This is my first time watching Rob without a cyber stutter. Oh, great. Well, I'm glad that it's actually a good connection for you. That's good to know. Alexander Kostic has joined us. Sup, Rob? How's it going, man? How's it going? Talking about a bit of lore and mythology. Do you think lore and mythology is important within role-playing games? Carl Swanson. Is this about how much exposition to have in games, or about how much is it worth to write the lore? Got in a few minutes after it started. Okay, dude. So, essentially, I'm asking what exactly that, to be fair. Like, how much exposition should you have in games? And also, that's a very good point as well. Like, how much time should you prepare? Now, as I just stated with that example there, that was an example that was relevant to the situation at hand. The players were going into a room to discuss a treaty, a defensive treaty. And the prince then turned around and said to them, well, it's fitting they're in this place because this is, this has a storied history about defensive pacts that have been made in the past. It was fitting that was mentioned. But absolutely, how much do you write? How much do you prepare? Is it something that you prepare for every session? Now, this is something that I'm coming across because I'm running a campaign called the Lorekeepers. I'm finding that I'm actually having to come up with quite a lot of lore. And thankfully, I've actually got quite a lore done already. There's quite a bit that's sort of in the background, but I have to be really careful with what I drop in there, because otherwise, like I said earlier, it can become a bit of a history lesson, which, isn't the most entertaining. But what are your thoughts on that? Please do share. Steffi says hung. Oh, man. I know what you mean, but I'm just being immature. Let me have a sip of tea. I keep forgetting to call this tea time with Rob, because I keep drinking tea on these streams. So, excuse me. That is good. I see that Lionel has joined us. Hello, Lionel. Good for you to join us. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It is a highly interesting topic to discuss. Now, we've said that obviously it helps, lore helps us build our worlds, and unfinished lore helps us, come up with story hooks and missions. We know there are different ways of injecting lore into your games, so having it be, relevant. For example, like, this is a good way, another good way to do it, I think. A lot of the time when you have dungeons set up in D&D, sometimes you'll be in a game and you will be in a dungeon because it's Dungeons and Dragons, there's going to be a dungeon. But what some people neglect to do is to actually tell you why that dungeon is there. Why does it exist? And I know there's a few people in the community that have spoken about this before. Why is this the way it is? What was this place before it fell into the hands of dangerous enemies that we now have to fight our way through? Or why has it succumbed to a deadly curse? I think that's a really great way to instill lore into your games in an effective way. To have a story slowly be revealed about the place that you're in. It doesn't necessarily have to be a dungeon. It can be a city, it can be an area of your world. Doesn't really matter. But my point is that once again, there is a use for you understanding that. The more that you discover about this place, then the more clues it can give your players to do, on how they can act in this particular area. They discover that this was a place that used to be sort of like catacombs beneath a reservoir, which were used to drain water through. So it could give the players a clue as to, okay, so there's going to be some kind of, leveling, sort of water level system in here. There could be water traps. We could end up getting, flooded in this place. It could be, an element of danger that you can imply using the lore. All sorts. Carl Swanson. Thanks, Rob. I write quite a bit about the lore, even fleshing out the stories of the gods and how they rose up and the mortal races were splintered from them. I try not to focus on it too much more than actually preparing sessions, but I still spend quite a bit of time in it. Yeah, absolutely. And, there's nothing wrong with that at all. Like, let's be honest, we're all creative people, and our wish to play D&D, or role-playing games in general, I think, is to scratch that creative itch, I feel. And that is one of the best things in the world. So there is nothing wrong whatsoever with you fleshing out your world with as much lore as you want. There is nothing wrong with that. In fact, that is an excellent thing to do. And it's something that I've done in the past as well. It's great when, there's nothing more satisfying when you've been thinking of all these different stories that are sort of separate in your world, and then something clicks and it all just meshes together, and you realise that you've got this timeline, this tapestry that all feeds back into what you've been doing with your campaigns. It's absolutely great stuff. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that whatsoever. What I think the best thing to do with that, however, is to, like I was saying before, have the lore that applies to your session or your campaign be at the forefront, Alessandro has arrived and says, lore is the blood of a world. Without it, it would be empty. Absolutely. But I would posit this, absolutely, I completely agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you. But in a session, be honest, is it the most pressing issue? Would a session not work if you didn't mention any of the lore in your campaign setting? I think it would be okay. I think you'd be all right. I know I use this topic quite a lot. A topic example. I always use it because it's great, because it's a lesson in world building. Star Wars. Yes, kids, once again, I'm going to be talking about Star Wars. I should just do a Star Wars dedicated stream. Look at Star Wars. The first Star Wars, A New Hope, okay? So, it starts off, and you are just dropped in, okay? You were dropped in, you are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Like, wait, what? What's the Rebel Alliance? What? What's a T-16 Skyhopper? No. None of this stuff is ever explained. Like, well, obviously it is explained. You kind of find out, but you find out through the story. You don't get someone turn around and say, the Rebel Alliance was formed a short while after Senator Palpatine ascended to become Emperor, and, you don't get that. And that's because it's rapid-paced storytelling, and that's what I think, I think that's the best thing a role-playing game can be, because it's engaging and interactive. It's information that's only given when either the plot or your characters demand it. So that's what I would say on that. But at the same time, without the lore, Star Wars wouldn't be Star Wars. You wouldn't have the Jedi or the Sith. You wouldn't have all the famous battles that went before and after the original trilogy. It's all that stuff. So it is obviously important as well. Steffi didn't have a recent war in my campaign until a player decided he was an ex-soldier. Comes up in some NPC faction motives on the adventures. Absolutely. For example, there is a character in the Lorekeepers called Ezekiel Raylan, who was a marshal. And the marshals were a essentially wandering lawmen that with their own kind of code, would go about the lands, enacting honourably and with justice in their hearts. They would, right wrongs. And they would take, matters into their own hands in what they believe to be the right way, which is generally, an honourable kind of way. They're generally good guys. But you know what? Those wouldn't be in my world if it wasn't for Tim Carney coming along to me whilst creating his character and saying, this is what I want. I'm like, okay, so there's this order that now exists in my world that I have not taken account for whatsoever, at the time anyway. And it's great. And it buys into that collaboration. And you understand that that is lore that is necessary. That is lore that needs to be in there. And it needs to be at the forefront. At least at some point it has to be. To give that character, the background that, he deserves. Has to be. Absolutely has to be. Drake Warren has joined. Hey, man. Cars wasn't. I totally agree, Rob. There's a great feeling in creating the lore and mythology. It's awesome when things start to click together. It may not be as significant to each session or even a campaign, but that's a part of why I enjoy Obsidian Portal. Players can read or ignore it at the... That's really bugging me that comments are being cut off. I'm so sorry. I assure you that if I can read the rest of the comment on my computer later, then I will respond. If I can't, but let's just have a look at that question again. So, yeah, absolutely. You're agreeing with me. I'm agreeing with you. It is great, and yeah, you're absolutely right. Sometimes it won't come up in a session. It might not even come up in the campaign, but it's there. It's just. It's almost like it's a structure. It's almost like the foundations of a building. Can't always see them, but they're there and they're helpful. And knowing all that stuff as a DM, you can draw on that at any time. And that's the best thing. It's always there for you to use. Alessandro, I guess not all the lore, but it should be in the context. See what happens in Ankea with Barker. Guess not all the lore, but it should be in the context. See what happens in Ankea with Barker. So, are you stating then that Barker with Windsor Cerceline only explores the lore that is relevant? I guess he does. Yeah, I think so. Please explain further. I would like to know your thoughts in more detail, but obviously not too long because I can't read the comments if they're too long. Goodness me. Sean Nagaiso, hey man. One thing I like about lore is that it changes based on culture, viewpoint, geography, etc. So certain people will see it differently, and that conflict or differences create even more interesting plots or conflicts. Dude, you're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. There is an event that I've not really spoken about an awful lot because it hasn't come up in the Lorekeepers, but it isn't a secret at all. And this is what it is. My setting is called the Nine Kingdoms. There's a few reasons why that is. One, there are 9 kingdoms. 2, I still am not happy with my ideas of my name for the overall continent. But the reason it's the 9 kingdoms is because beforehand there were these 9 lands, or this huge area that was, ruled by separate forces. I'm not going to go into why. Unnecessary lore. But once, a long time ago, there was a period of time known as the Reign of Chaos. And all reports say that this was a hellish time that was rife with warfare, conflict, fire, destruction. Okay? And then the God King descended upon this reign of chaos with fury and with order, and he conquered the whole land and unified this land into the 9 kingdoms as we see it in the Lorekeepers today. And with that alliance, they were able to conquer chaos with order. Okay? Now, I reckon people back in those days probably didn't agree. Some people didn't agree with him. There was a war. So, how much of that is true? How much is that, the victor, writing history, as it were? That is something that I am highly keen to explore further in the Lorekeepers. I've hinted at certain things like that throughout the campaign, and there's a lot of stuff that I haven't mentioned in there, but you're absolutely right. Events that take place in your lore, in your history, in your mythology can be looked at differently, vastly differently from different cultures and, different people's ideologies, So it's, that's a really great point, Sean. Good job. Lionel, spot on, Sean. Absolutely, dude. It's a very good point. Carl Swanson. Players can be great jumping points for the lore. It gets you thinking about the details. How long has the order been around? Is it still, etc.? Absolutely. And it's a tricky one. It is a really tricky one, because when you start thinking about, you have different factions, you also have to remember you have different races. So if you're thinking, this faction could have been, it could have been quite a new one, or it could be quite an old one, or it was formed quite recently, but hang on a second. This faction is primarily made up of elves. Well, elves live ages, don't they? So obviously it's going to have to be it could have been quite old that this, a long time ago that this thing was made, this faction. So yeah, it's something that you definitely have to think of. It's one of those things. Chronological order is a pain in the arse sometimes when it comes to world building, because you have all these ideas of what you want to have happened in your world. It's working out the order sometimes that can be tricky. But I think as long as they kind of flow into the other and they kind of make sense and they all have the same kind of tone and feel that you want to maintain throughout all of your lore and all of your setting, then you can't go wrong. I'm going to have a sip of tea whilst I read the next comment. Steffi says, love Barker's dwarven elven settlement. How it was like elven wallpaper over thick, burly dwarven walls. Absolutely. Like, I'm a big fan of that too. Like, I enjoy the idea of obviously the lived in world, lived in and used world. There are just trying to think of a suitable thing to talk about that isn't spoilerific. There were in the Nine Kingdoms, there was founding races, essentially, what races that I call the Primogens. And the Primogens were sort of like a progenitor sort of civilization before what there is now in the Lorekeepers. And, you know, that's a great thing. And it's almost to the point of a trope now, I suppose. But it's a good one. It is a really good one to have because it shows that people came before. I say a trope because it's not really a trope, it's just history, isn't it? There's obviously going to be people, you know, things happening before. Am I calling the Roman Empire a trope? Am I calling the Vikings a trope? No, I think it makes total sense. And I love having my settings reflect that. Freedom Salvation is a city that's in my campaign. And it's, it's a really old city. And I think I use the phrase, the present stacked up against the past. I really like that. Just a really simple, quick way of saying, yeah, this is an old place, but times change. So absolutely, Steffi. It's a really good example with Barker's work as well. Alessandro, yes, I mean the war between elves and dwarves and how it is explained, and things come out bit by bit through an adventure that at first nobody could see that coming, but the pieces of lore that give you that. I'm really sorry, man. I'm really bad at reading comments, but I get what you mean. I think that's further as to what Steffi is saying, that yes, you find out more and more. You get piece by piece what happened, and I think that's a really cool thing to do. You're not just dropping an entire, history lesson in one go. You're just giving clues as to what happened. And I think that's a really neat thing to do. It's a really great idea. Because it gives that sense of mystery, mythology, myths, legends. It's not all fact. Or, it's, as we were saying before with what Sean was saying, that it's, you can have contradictory versions of events. So finding out things bit by bit, it's just good storytelling, isn't it? Jacob Norman joined. Good to see you, my good sir. I don't know what I was about to say. I was like, good to see, cannot speak, process, thoughts. Hey man, how's it going? That's better. Carl Swanson, chronologically, I cannot read today. It's been a very long day. Chronologically is why I sometimes prefer writing about the gods. Time can be more subjective and fluid in those stories. Who knows whether the goddesses of motherhood and her children, the goddesses of motherhood had her children before or after becoming a god. There are different and conflicting points of views on the matter. But does your thing... Oh my god, I keep losing the end of comments. But no, you're absolutely right. And I think that's a really good thing, and especially a helpful thing with fantasy role-playing games in particular, is that, we're not dealing with an exact science here. We are dealing with, like, legends and lore and legends of yore. It doesn't have to be exact. Like, it doesn't have to be to the minute of, what you'd expect. It could be... Yeah, it doesn't have to be exact, is what I'm trying to say. Ben Fisher joined. Hey man, how's it going? Carl Swanson, the present stacked up against the past, so evocative without having to get into the small details. Yeah, man, well, like I said, just saying that, you know what I mean. I think it's really important to consider how you convey that, like what language you're using when, and I say this about a lot of things in my content, to be fair, but if you're really careful with how you explain things, you don't waste time, you just get to the point, and that tells you everything you need to know. That this is an old place, but life goes on. There's, things have been built up on top of it. And later on, when it's important, you can then go into further detail, which is great. So yeah, what other ways do you guys like to insert lore and mythology into to your world? The other thing, I'm just going to explain this whilst, if you guys feel like it, add more comments in so we can chat more. Another thing that I like to do, and it's something that you must not forget. We obviously, a lot of us in the community talk about, we as players like to feel like we've made an impact in the world. We like to feel that what our actions have done have, made a difference, for good or ill. We want to see the world develop. We want to see it change around us, and we want to see it change because of what we've done. One of the best ways of inserting lore into your campaign world without you having to do anything other than play D&D is to remember campaigns that you've done before. I am of the opinion that it's fine if you've got like a whole bunch of different settings. That's completely awesome and admirable. However, as it stands, I have only ever had 2 Dungeons and Dragons settings. My current one is the Nine Kingdoms, which is what the Lorekeepers is based in, and my previous one is a one called Main Realm, and this was basically my 3.5 setting. Now, I've explained in other streams that I treat different editions of D&D like different eras. 3.5, okay, well, get rid of the 0.5, but just imagine 3rd edition, okay? Take away the word edition, replace era. That's the 3rd era. That is the 3rd era of my world, okay? I'm now playing 5th edition D&D for the Lorekeepers. That means that these events are taking place in the 5th era. It's all part of the same world, and because of that, it means that I can draw on all of my previous creative work that I've worked hard on to tell, to instill into my world. Now, as of yet, nothing from Main Realm has been sort of discovered or used or found in the Nine Kingdoms. For all sense and purposes, they are entirely separate. However, that doesn't mean that that has to stay that way. It doesn't mean that it isn't the case. In my headcanon, they both exist in the same place. And at some point, Main Realm might return. I like to think of it as a long-lost land. Kind of Atlantean, in a way. Kind of like Numenor as well in Lord of the Rings. A world onto itself that vanished. It is gone. It is a legendary idea that there was once this other place that just disappeared. And it disappeared was because I am now using a different system. You see? It's really simple, but all of that work, all of those stories that occurred in Main Realm, they still happened. So, at some point, I reckon I can use some of that stuff for my own lore. I can talk about characters that I have played, or campaigns that I've run. I can talk about Zorfintal, the great game of dragons that I ran once. I can talk about Star Thief, a legendary villain that I once used. I can talk about Valdane, an all-powerful sorcerer that I once played. I can talk about Droskor, king of the Undercroft, or Theodrex of Hemlon, the multiply slain individual. No, my friend once played Theodrex of Hemlon, who was a ranger, bless him, and he died and came back so many times I lost count. It was hilarious. It was in a time where we had a very cavalier idea as to what you should do when a character dies in D&D. Fantastic stuff, all in good fun. Bless my friend Matt, who played Theodrex, is all I shall say. But you get my point. All of this stuff is things that I've used before, but it's still there. It's still there, and that's why it can be linked. That's my thoughts about it anyway. And I do intend to talk about Main Realm more, because a lot of stuff happened in there, you know? And this is kind of why I'm enjoying setting out with Nine Kingdoms as well, because, like, Nine Kingdoms is still relatively new in comparison to Main Realm. Main Realm was stuff that I've been doing for years and years and years and years and years. So I'm enjoying starting the journey again, you know? God, I ramble on. Carl Swanson reminds me of the whole thing with the Dark Souls universe. I love Dark Souls. I've recently started playing Dark Souls 3, finally. And I'm really enjoying it so far. Love Dark Souls. Everything about it is great. Anyway, sorry. Reminds me of the whole thing with the Dark Souls universe. Each game takes place in kind of the same world, but time is so wonky that the kingdoms sometimes are lost to history or resurface. You're absolutely right. Like, you hear, like, some things carry over, like some of the names of the countries I've noticed, like, you find Knights of, is it Katarina or Cataronia? To be honest, that's the thing about Dark Souls, because it's so warped and strange. It is hard to sort of get a lock on the lore sometimes, because it's so sort of majestic. I think that's the strength of Dark Souls in a way. There's so much lore in Dark Souls. It makes you feel tiny and insignificant in comparison, which as a very deadly and unforgiving game is nothing but a plus, nothing but a good thing, because you're like, well, what difference can I make? This lowly individual that, you know, can die as easily as breathing in this world, you know? Dark Souls does a really good job of just assaulting you with all this lore, but at the end of the day, it is there to make you feel like you are a small, worthless, and helpless individual in a chaotic, terrifying world. But you can triumph over adversity if you really, really try. And I mean that because, as any good Dark Souls fan will tell you and complain about, Dark Souls is hard. Yeah. Sorry, it's not one about Dark Souls, but it's a good example. Really good example to use, Carl. So, Steffi, my kobolds lived in the ruins of a bathhouse. That's awesome. I love it already. Let's continue. One of my PCs took a tropey Roman bath, and the kobolds accepted him as a god. They currently... That's amazing. They currently in the hometown running a temple to the PC. That's amazing. That's such a good idea, Steffi. That's really cool. I've never ever thought about that idea. I've seen lesser creatures like goblins and things like that revere, you know, player characters from time to time, but never so much as a god. I love that idea. That's hilarious. Once again, that makes me think of Star Wars, Return of the Jedi, the Ewoks thinking C-3PO is in fact a glowing golden god. That's really cool stuff. I love that. Steffi continues to say, I use my character's Archfey patron in my campaign, so same multiverse? Absolutely, that's the thing. Like, one of the most amazing things that I've always loved about D&D is the different dimensions. I absolutely adore the multiverse in D&D. And because it's just... You know what? If there was ever a mission statement for D&D, it is infinite storytelling. You could lock a bunch of people in a room with enough supplies for them to survive on, and just what they need for D&D, and they could just go until the end of time telling different stories. And that is what I feel the multiverse of D&D represents. It is a pantheon of different pathways that you can walk down, you know, and each one, you know, whether it be the Clockwork Nirvana of Mechanus or the Shadowfell, you know, any of them, like, there's just a rich, you know, I keep saying pantheon, rich tapestry of stories to discover. So yeah, and I think connecting them is just a really wise and cool thing to do. Also, to continue on that point, I was actually speaking to Barker about this yesterday on Discord. If you guys haven't checked out the Abtown Discord yet, do check it out. It was really good fun having a chat with a bunch of people on there. But I was saying, the multiverse, it kind of makes me think of comic books, in particular DC comic books. They're all about their multiverse and their crises, essentially crises, whatever. You know what I mean? And whenever something goes wrong, whenever the writers get tired or the storylines get stale, they have a flashpoint. They have a crisis on Two Earths. They have a crisis on Infinite Earths. You know, they reset everything and they play with the dimensions to tell new stories. And I think that D&D is one of its strongest when you do that. It's epic and it's completely sort of over the top sort of storytelling, but you know, and probably not the best thing to do with low level characters, but it is a way of upping the ante. You know. Sorry, I get really passionate when it comes to the multiverse. I do apologise if that is boring to you guys watching. I hope it isn't anyway. I'll have a sip of tea because my God, I ramble. So, Kyle is on it today. Kyle's got some good thoughts. Kyle says, exactly, Rob. The scale of the world and the esoteric qualities of the lore drive home the smallness of being a descendant of the pygmy. Yes. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah, it really does. You're sort of, you sort of feel like a really kind of second-rate citizen, to be honest. Everyone in Dark Souls laughs at you. Everyone says something really just weird, and then they laugh in a really horrible way, and you don't feel like you've got any more information than when you started, and you feel like they've judged you a little bit, and it's if you want to talk about mood and tone, Dark Souls is the masterclass, you know. So yeah. But there we go. I've had a bit of a long chat about this. This has been great. So I'm now going to talk a little about the competition that I mentioned at the very beginning of this stream. For those of you also that have joined me since and didn't hear, I am going to be doing a competition around this topic. So, and it's you're not. I'm afraid you're not going to win anything because like most of you guys are in other countries to me, so I'm not going to be able to post anything to you. Also, you know, well, you will win one thing. I'll tell you what you'll win in a second. But it won't be a physical thing that I send to you. So, as I mentioned before, I have been developing a fair bit of lore for the Lorekeepers. I've done quite a lot already, but I'm always thinking of more stuff. And I really enjoy doing it. But I thought, wouldn't it be wicked if I throw this out to the community? I would like those of you who have enjoyed this video or who would like to contribute to this competition to do the following. Number 1, you have to be subscribed to my channel. Number 2, you throw me a legend of a Lorekeeper. Okay? That can be a myth, that can be a legend, that can be a folktale, it can be anything. Okay? And the best one that I read in the comments below in YouTube, okay, where I post this, the best one will get included in a future session of the Lorekeepers, which will not be too far away. And it will be part of the lore in my campaign world that you'll be able to see happen. It's not much of a prize, but I think because of the nature of this community and the people that watch my stuff, you're really smart and you've all got really, really good ideas. And I think it would be a really great way to thank everyone who has, you know, subscribed to my channel so far and who listen to me ramble on all the time, to give something back, to know that there is a star in the sky, there is a story in the grimoire that belongs to them that is in the world of the Lorekeepers. So, essentially, I'm giving you free reign. It can be about slaying a particular monster, the defeat of an evil tyrant. It can be the climax of a difficult and treacherous war. Anything you want. So yeah, that is the competition, essentially. The lore competition. I should have thought of a better name for it, to be fair. The myth competition. No. No, the lore competition, that's fine. The lore competition is what it will be. If that interests you, like I say, subscribe. And if you're watching this, hopefully on YouTube, perhaps give this a like or a subscribe or not. We're all friends here. We are definitely friends here. I've changed it up. We are definitely all friends. I've just got, let's have a look. I've got a few more comments that I'll read before I go. Steffi Carl, never played Dark Souls. Sounds like having a chat with my mother. Oh my goodness me. Steffi, you know what? I think I know what you mean. I'm just playing. Carl Swanson. That's awesome though. Can't wait to get started. Oh, you wanna do it, man? Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, just hit me with it, man. Like, if anyone is interested, I would love it. I'm only going to use one. You know, I'm not I'm not using this as a way to get you guys to write my backstories for me or anything. I will use the one that I think is well, that appeals to me. Essentially, it'll be my discretion. But yeah, I think it'll be really cool, and it's just a way of saying, you know, if you're subscribed to me, you watch my stuff, thanks. And look, there's a little bit in my world that, you know, also belongs to you. So there we go. Steffi says a co-myth petition. Co-myth petition. It doesn't roll off the tongue, I'm afraid, Steffi. It's not, it's not, you know, at least it would. I'm just going to call it the lore competition, okay? So yeah, once more, subscribe to my channel. Hit me with some bloody lore, okay? And it could even be about a lorekeeper. It could be about any of the factions that you know of in my world thus far. It could be something entirely new. Either way, it's all up for grabs. So if you're interested, let me know. Steffi says, not my best work. Well, you know, it's on the fly. I don't blame me. Anyway, I'm going to head off now. But like I say, really looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with, if you would like. And yeah, give this video a like or a subscribe. And I hope that all of your performances are up to standard. Finish.